Well, we're going to climb inside the upper regions of your head today for a moment. And the topic I want to talk about is something you might have heard. It's called automatic thoughts. Automatic thoughts. And this kind of comes out of, there's a lot of different schools of psychology. The best psychologists, in my view, are able uh, to integrate a lot from a lot of different perspectives. Not one perspective tends to, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. But it's, in my view, it's good to see somebody that understands all of it, so they know what fits with you. But there is one school that tends to focus on automatic thoughts, but also it's very helpful. It's a very helpful school, the cognitive world. If you've heard of CBT or cognitive therapy, because in most of our, shenanigans, there's going to be some thinking and stuff that goes through our heads. And it's good to put your arms around that. One of my favorite things that Jesus ever said was when he said, if you want to really know the whole key to this whole thing, we got to love God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. That's all of our whole personhood. And this mind thing is a big, big part of that. And so here's an interesting kind of dissection of this, that when you're having thoughts, there's a good chance they're not even coming from your mind. They could be coming, as we're going to see, from other parts of you. And then we kind of are down a road just because of something we're thinking. So automatic thoughts. Well, automatic means what it says. It's automatic. You didn't choose it. You didn't necessarily, hit a lever. It just appears. Boom. There's a thought in your head. Now, let's get into the first part of this. What's the problem about automatic thoughts? I mean, we'd love to have things go off automatically, right? You do a lot in your life to have your system produce automatic functioning. That is a huge part of how God wired you, is to be able to do things automatically. For instance, when you drive your car, okay, you have automatic things that you do. When you go to bed at night, you probably don't plan, put in your calendar, brush your teeth. No, you do that automatically. So we're wired to do things automatically. Well, what gets wired is the automatic system, not necessarily the content. You didn't come into the world knowing how to drive. You didn't come into the world knowing how to, go to brush your teeth. That had to be wired. And what happens is the content of our automatic thoughts is not necessarily something that we chose, nor is it something that can be helpful, but they're still produced. So here's the problem with automatic thoughts. You just find yourself and you have this thought, or you're going through an event, a situation, and it'll be an automatic evaluation, an automatic plan, automatic all sorts of stuff from that evaluation. What do you do, for example, if you're a single person and you meet somebody at an event or something, you think, wow, I'd like to, they seem interesting. I'd like to talk to them, or I'd like to ask them out. And automatically, well, they're probably already taken, or they're not going to really like me, or I'm too this, or I'm too that. It's automatic. Well, here's the problem. First thing is, we hear these thoughts and our total person responds to those thoughts. We hear them and our personhood responds, meaning it might be a physical response. Your heart might start to palpitate. You might get depressed. You might have a loss of energy. Oh, they never like me. Or you might have anxiety. Okay. But worse than just our internal responses, we hear these thoughts and we also act and choose according to our thoughts. Well, I'm not going to call her. Or I'm not going to go up and introduce myself to him, or I'm not going to try to get that job because they're probably looking for people that have advanced degrees and I don't. When in reality, may be way different than that. But we hear these thoughts, and these thoughts can drive our behavior, and we act and we choose based on what came automatically. And we have symptoms related to these: depression, anxiety, fear, panic, impulse control, reactivity in relationships, broken relationships. I mean, the list is endless of the symptoms: clinical symptoms, relational symptoms, performance symptoms. How many, I'm a competitive golfer, and how many golfers, I mean, you can go back through the history of golf, and somebody's there for the first time on the back nine on the fourth day of the US Open, and they start thinking things, and all of a sudden they have been playing brilliantly, and their performance just goes to where, because the thoughts create all this anxiety that interferes. This is a big deal. There's a lot of symptoms that go with this. One of the big things that CBT focuses on is reducing symptoms by working on the thoughts. And one of the saddest parts about this is that we hear this stuff, we believe it, we choose actions in accordance with those thoughts. And then that creates a path. In other words, we start having a pattern of behaving in a certain way. And then that path becomes deeply neurologically wired into kind of how we behave and how we choose and how we act. And that becomes a long time, and it gets more deeply ingrained. And then that's kind of how we are, so to speak, because a path becomes your future path. One of the great philosophers, I can't remember who it was, Albie probably knows, says that a person's character is their destiny. Well, how you're glued together and how you're wired has much more to do with where you end up in life than a lot of circumstances, a lot of times. So that's a problem. Now let's get to the bigger problem. The bigger problem. You got to get to the bigger problem, which is you got to ask yourself some questions. Are these even thoughts? The answer is many times no. These are not what we would actually classify as a thought, in that they are an idea or a concept or words strung together that come into your head, and we think they're thoughts. But what I mean by this, they're not real thinking. There's a difference between a thought I can have and thinking, because thinking comes from something above that, which is a higher part of the brain. This is where a lot of mindfulness does. It's a lot of what, the people that talk about kind of detaching from your whole world and getting above it. And psychologists call the observing ego. That whatever is going on there, the question is, am I thinking about what I'm thinking? Now that's thinking. When you get above your automatic thoughts and start to evaluate, which is part of the bigger problem. You start to get into these thoughts, and you know what? These thoughts may be being produced by your body. If you've been through trauma, for example, you've got an overactive amygdala, which is creating anxiety and cortisol and all of this. You can almost do a reverse engineering of a panic disorder or a phobia or something like that. Somebody's body starts to react very similarly, actually, to high performers. High performers' bodies react in the same thing, and they interpret that as motivation and activation. And I'm getting ready. I'm going to go perform. Whereas somebody with an anxiety disorder, their body starts to activate, and then they will start to think things to explain that. Well, it must be because the plane's going to crash. I'm nervous. Oh no, the plane's going to go down, or I'm nervous they're going to reject me. And now you start thinking things. It didn't even originate from thinking. It might have originated from, kind of deep, kind of like message centers from anxiety in your body, trauma in your body, or depression in your body. Clinical depression, one of the things we see in some forms of clinical depression is negative thinking. And as one of my mentors used to call it painful thinking. Depressed people think painful thoughts. And so these are being produced from a lot of different ways. And then you have to ask this question. I want you to ask this question about what you're thinking. Is that helpful? Is that helpful? Is it helpful for me to think that way? Is it producing the results in my life that I want? Secondly, what results in my life is it producing? Well, in the meeting somebody at a party situation, the results it's producing is you don't go up and meet them and possibly get to go have lunch and find out, you guys could have 50 great years and 4 kids together. Oh, no, I'll listen to this physiologically produced thought instead and go down that path. Or you could call on that customer or go apply for that job and maybe have a great career. But we don't know that because I'm just going to listen to these thoughts in my head, which is a good question to ask. Have you ever noticed this? Just because you're thinking something does not mean it's true. Think about that. We're human beings. We're not omniscient and we're flawed and we don't have all the information. And sometimes whatever we're thinking, good chance that's not the whole picture. That's not even true. So second question to ask yourself is what's going around in my head? Is that producing the results in my life that I want to produce in my life? And is it producing results in my life because I act and choose and follow on it? Is it producing results that I don't want in my life? Where's your thinking taking you? And the next question, this bigger problem part of this is where did these thoughts come from anyway? I was talking to somebody the other day and I know their mother. And could be mother, could be father, could be sister, brother, boss, whoever. And we were talking about something and they just kind of automatically said, well, this. And I said, I'm not sure that's you talking. That sounds like your mother. And, you can actually hear other people's voices. I work a lot in teams and sometimes you can hear somebody put an idea out there. And I say, it doesn't sound like you. It sounds like your boss. What do you think? And the question, where did these come from? I always, tell people, if your mother, your father, your grandpa, or somebody is living in your head, I hope you're charging them rent because they're taking up space. If they're living there for free, maybe you need to have an eviction discussion. Where did these come from? A lot of times they come from trauma. We go through trauma and that shapes our view of the world. The world's dangerous. I better not step out. And it was dangerous in that trauma. You were victimized. But being victimized and then having a whole train of thinking that orders our worlds past that experience, PTSD can live on a long time until we begin to get to a bigger world than that experience. So they could come from your family of origin. They taught you to think that way. It could come from your ex, could come from a relationship. I remember a woman I treated one time who wanted to go back and have this career. She had all these dreams. She wouldn't do it. And I said, why don't you just sign up for a class? She said, well, I'm not smart enough to do that. We started to unpack those thoughts. That's what her ex had told her for 20 years. And now those were her thoughts. Well, we had to do something about that. She ultimately went back and I'll never forget. She wouldn't even make the call to the college she wanted to go to at 40 to get an application. This is before you could submit it online. And I remember saying, bring the number in here, and sat in the office and virtually made her pick up the phone and dial the number and ask for the application. I know they're going to reject me. I know they're going to say I'm too old. I know this. No, we don't know that. And if they did, what's she going to say? Well, all schools are going, no, we don't know that. We're going to call a bunch of them. Anyway, it worked. She did it. We had to coach her through those thinking patterns all the way. This is what great football coaches do at halftime when the team's down 20 points. Get them out of those negative spirals. So where did these negative thoughts come from? Well, probably not you. It could have come from trauma, could have come from experience, could have come from a lot of other places. One of my favorite passages, favorite verses in the Bible, it says to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The renewing of your mind. One of the first ones I heard about that when people feel bad about themselves and they start a spiritual growth path, somebody said, look, God don't make no junk. You keep thinking of yourself like junk. And what does he say? Well, he says you're his workmanship. You're created for good stuff. So let's stop telling yourself that you're junk and we got to start down a different path. Well, how many times have you seen an abused person show up in life and they really believe that they're, flawed in some way? So where did these come from? We got to evaluate. We're not even learned to think this way. This is not helpful. Whose are they anyway? Well, we talked about where they might have come from. It might be mom or dad or a teacher or somebody else. But whose are they? Now they are yours. Well, if they're yours, you own them and you get to decide whether or not they get to stay. All right? You grew up and, maybe you had 10 relatives living in your house and one of them was a snitty cousin or brother or sister, and your parents made you share a room with them. Well, now you're an adult, and it's your apartment or your house. Whose is it? And you get to decide whether that critical whoever is going to live in your house. Well, your house is your head now. So you get to decide these. I remember one time Olivia, our oldest daughter, she was having trouble sleeping. It was about the sixth grade or something. She had a pretty tough teacher that year, and she'd get anxious the night before sometimes. And we put her to bed, and about 5 minutes later, Daddy, and I went in there and said, well, she said, I can't sleep. I can't sleep. What should I think about? Because she was worried about school. I said, Olivia, count some sheep. She goes, what do you mean count sheep? And I said, well, just picture some sheep jumping over a fence and just keep counting them and don't stop. I don't care if you get to 10,000, don't stop. You just watch them jump and you count them. It's all I want you to think about, watching those sheep. So I say goodnight and I walk out. About 10 minutes later, Daddy, I said, what? Come back in there and she says, my sheep keep crashing into the fence. I go, Olivia, they're your sheep. Make them jump over the fence. These are your sheep. I'm not controlling your sheep. And she starts to learn how to think about her sheep. Well, their sheep are your thoughts. So, okay, whose are they? They're yours. Let's do something about it. I want to use a little analogy here. There's a difference in being on the plane and being in the cockpit. There's a difference in being on the plane and being in the cockpit. See, you're the plane and you might be sitting in row 34B, but I need to get you in the pilot seat. So that's our prefrontal cortex has these abilities to go higher. My dog Finley, she barks. That's the way she's wired when, and I like that. When, a stranger comes to the door, she runs up and says, not so fast, Bubba. You're not coming in here until I give more information. And she is scary. Dobermans are the biggest lovers in the world, by the way. But if somebody comes where they're not supposed to be, she's going to check you out. So here's the thing. That's what dogs do. They don't have the higher brain functions that you do. I've never seen Finley run to the front door and bark and step back. I wonder if that was helpful. Did I bark loud enough? Did I bark at the right time? Am I barking at exactly the right person? And a bigger thought never comes, which is, I wonder if barking then is going to get me closer to where I want to be on Thursday, and ponder it. No, Finley doesn't do that. She just thinks. Pretty smart. Dobermans are really intelligent, but you're more intelligent. You have the ability to get above your thoughts and observe your thoughts. And so I'm going to give a quick little list here, and then we're going to go to some questions and our callers. But the first thing is just start to observe. Get out of row 43 and go sit in the cockpit. And, your dashboard is sort of like your thoughts. You can see them all there. How's your altitude? Do you have enough fuel? Am I stupid? And is this going to fail? And, is this person going to reject me? I'm not going to get this job. You can see this dashboard, but you are not the dashboard. It's separate from you. And we have to make that separation. So observe, get into your observing ego. The ego means I. So the I that observes the I. Now we're observing our ways. One of my favorite verses when God says, observe your ways. In other words, don't just live your life, observe how you're living your life. It says in Psalm 139, where we ask God for help, observe my thoughts, it says. See if there's any hurtful way in me. And David was going, I've got some stuff in here that's really not helping me. And he asked God for help to observe those. You might ask God, and you might ask some other people that are for you to evaluate what you're thinking. And is this reality? Is this accurate? So we got to get an observation. Then you got to evaluate those thoughts. Are those helpful? Are those reality? And start to question? That's what cognitive therapists do. They get you to evaluate your thoughts and begin to question them. Third thing, remove yourself from instantly reacting. You have a thought and you feel anxious. Just sit back. Well, there's that thought. Feeling anxious. I'm feeling this. You don't have to do anything. The very fact that you're naming the emotion gives you more brain function to get above it and calm down anyway. So remove yourself from the reacting and observe the reacting. Then what they'll teach you is dispute those thoughts. Well, that's not true. I'm not junk. God didn't make no junk. I'm not going to do that. Or I don't know if they're going to reject me. I haven't talked to them yet. I'm going to find out. Or if they reject me, they might have rejected me, but they're not the only person in the world. And if you're not armed with things that are going to dispute what's automatic, then automatic is going to be the pattern and the path that you go down. So dispute them and choose the sheep jumping over the fence, right? You got to choose the good stuff. I remember I had a patient one time who overcame extreme PTSD. And sometimes you get to that moment where she could continue to go down this awful path that we were evaluating in the moment. And I'd say this instead. She'd say, okay, I'm going to choose to believe that. It is really interesting. Because she would actually use her weakness as her strength. She would say, I'm really good at not thinking about some things. In other words, she would split off trauma and all that kind of stuff. She said, so I'm going to choose to not think about that. I'm going to flip it in the other direction and block out this negative stuff, which is you're thinking, I'm going to choose to believe that. So dispute and choose. And then what do? Rinse and repeat. This is not a one-time deal. You got to do this over and over and over and over and over and over and over. All the neuroplasticity people in neuroscience will tell you that your brain patterns and the wiring underneath that can actually grow new wiring. That's what growth is. That's how, we used to hear this stuff. A person's personality is fixed by their time they're 6 years old. There's a lot of truth to that. A lot of truth to that. It's fixed in a lot of ways. Now, we know that the brain continues to change and probably your identity didn't truly form till you're about 25. But a lot of it's fixed. It gets fixed early. So, well, it's fixed. So, I have a 100-year-old house. When we bought it, it was fixed a long time ago. In other words, it was the way it is. So we didn't like the way the kitchen wasn't connected to the den. So we knocked down some walls and we remodeled it. Now it's fixed also, but it's a different fixed. That's what neuroplasticity does. We can change the way we. How many times have you ever heard someone, I used to think this, now I believe this. I used to think this, now I believe this. One of my favorite verses, Paul says, he used to think that you had to do all this religious stuff and be good enough for God to love you. He says, I used to think that, but now I think this. Now I know that God's love is free. And because of what Jesus did, if I receive that, I'm totally forgiven. That is a new way of thinking. See, that's taking something that was fixed and fixing it. You can change your thinking from all this negative stuff. So rinse and repeat. We're just going to keep doing this over and over and over. And then this is very important. You've got to act on the new thoughts. If you're thinking that person might not reject me, we don't know that. Well, I'm going to go act on that and go talk to them, because once you start to act on new patterns of thinking, those are the ones that's going to get it in the same way we talked about earlier. Those are going to get wired, and you get to evaluate the results, and you get to go try it again. And I can't tell you how many people I've treated that once were afraid to do this, and now they do that, some of it for a living. You can redo this stuff. Fear of flying. That's a great example. How many people won't get on an airplane? They're certain it's going to go down until they get treatment, and now they fly all over the world. It happens every day. Rinse and repeat. But we got to buy the ticket. You got to act on the new. And then reload that computer. We're also going to, apart from the problems, be reloading your computer with new information and new beliefs, new declarations, new affirmations, all those kinds of things. We need to be reminded. One of the things that I love to do, I was doing it as recently as 3:00 this morning. I woke up and I've been traveling, and I was kind of lying there and I was a little awake, and I thought, well, use this time. And I was saying some prayers, and then I said, I'm going to work on reloading the computer here a little bit. And I went to one of my favorite reloads, and that's Psalm 23, where it says, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. And as I was going over that over and over and over, I was just reminded of, and that wasn't any big, nothing bad is going on right now. I'm sure I'll have hard seasons again in life. So I'm not in one right now. Kind of things are okay. But it was such a good place just to lie there. I think I've got a shepherd who, even it says, it goes on in that psalm, even if we're at war with enemies, it says he's going to prepare a table in the midst of that. And just those thoughts of getting into the computer, I went to sleep pretty quickly. And I wasn't doing it to go to sleep, but whatever was amping up and waking me up was probably how badly I played golf yesterday. Just went back to sleep, reloading the computer, and then reevaluate constantly. So there's a bunch of stuff to go work on automatic thoughts.